We are underway. This is the Saturday Break the Cage Hangout, coming to you live from Arizona and Utah. That picture behind me is a abstract painting that I did of Arizona called Arizona. It's actually purchased and in a private gallery somewhere in the Midwest. So selling and creating paintings and art is something that I do also, and it's kind of fun. And this one happened to be in some private gallery somewhere. But I took a picture first, so I painted it, so I get to use the picture, right? We are today with our fantastic guest, Ephraim Olschewski, again, who's going to be with us last week, this week, and 4 more weeks as we discuss the incredible importance and power of something that doesn't get talked about very much, which is language. Last time we talked about loose lips, which is our tendency to just sort of chatter without intent and without creating the outcome or being specific about an outcome, blaming, doing all the kinds of things that don't really contribute to real power in language. Today, we're going to talk about, the name of today's is language, the core of creation. Now, that's kind of a bold claim, and I intended it to be a little evocative, provocative perhaps, and controversial, but we're going to talk about language being the core of creation, and that's going to be our topic for today. So without any warning or warm up, I'm going to just ask Ephraim here, I'm going to give him just this long to think about it. Ephraim, the question I want you to think about and respond to is, what comes to your mind when I say language, the core of creation? I'd like you to just respond to that and riff on that for a minute.
Awesome. Thanks for having me again. And I'll get right to answering your question. So I think when I'm listening to you talking about it, and if for the people that were here last week and for the people that will be here the next 4 weeks and today, you'll hear me talk about the same thing most likely, because it's really the foundation to all of it. And I said last week that people talk and they say all the right things, but without integrity, it won't really matter. So when I think about the core of creation and using language as the core of creation, it really comes back to integrity. Like, if there's not integrity with my word, then it won't really matter. And I agree with you that that language is, all things get created in language, and that creation is really a result of doing what I said I would do.
Perfect. It's a fantastic intro. And by way of introduction, and I wanted to ask him that first and just let that sit. Integrity, language, it is doing what we say and paying attention to what we say. Ephraim is a friend. He's also a good coach. He helps businesses. He does a lot of the same things that I do, transformational coaching, business coaching. He's very successful and a very good, a good friend and a respected person on my part. And I enjoy having him here. And when I thought about the guest, we did the 3-part series on integrity, and Manny was our guest for that, Manny St. Victor, who's a psychiatrist. When I thought of language, Ephraim's name just popped in my mind, and I always go with those sorts of things, and contacted him, and he was immediately receptive to that. And so I really appreciate having Ephraim here, both as a friend and as a fellow transformational coach, a colleague, and someone well qualified to opine on the power and nature of language and integrity and all of the pieces that do that. The other thing is, it's interesting, I just finished the 7th stone in my integrity pillar of keys to power. I've been doing this 50-part series, and I'm just a little over halfway done. And integrity was the 4th pillar, and of course pivotal. And we did that this morning. So those will be out in the next day or two. I think day 26 or 27 was up yesterday, and put one up today. That's what's interesting, that integrity came up again. So there are 3 parts that I want to think about with respect to language as the core of creation. And here's the 3 ways I broke it down. I said it all starts here. Number 2 is words have power. And number 3 is influencing yourself and others. So we've already touched a little on it all starts here. Here is 2 things. Here is here, meaning, it starts with you, and then here in terms of language. And I'm not going to talk a lot today at all about the difference between speaking and thinking language. That's going to be covered in an entire episode by itself, because that's completely different. But we are going to talk today about how come it starts with language. It all starts here. And Ephraim, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit in that context about something you said last week, which was the difference between descriptive and declarative language as a starting point for it all starts here.
Yeah. I was just, and when I told you when I said I'm going to come on and I'm going to, I said, yeah, let's do it for the next 6 weeks. And I told you, I said, I'm going to be traveling a lot.
Yeah.
And so I just want to acknowledge that right now I'm in Utah, and next week I'll be in Wisconsin, and the week after that I'll be back in Utah. I think I'm not sure which one of those weeks we're taking a break, but so I just want to acknowledge that. So I am traveling a lot these next few weeks, and one of the things I was yesterday was with a group of youth counselors, and I was working with them, and one of the things that really stood out was that life is happening out here. And so I'm going to spend the whole episode where we'll talk about the power of, like what's the language happening in our heads, and then also, the language that, like, what we're speaking. But I remember I was in a workshop once, and she said that everything gets created twice. And she said, first it's created spiritually, and then it's created physically. And you could look at that a lot of ways. And if you said everything's created twice, first it's created in language, and then it's created in action. And so, yeah, just talking a little bit about the difference in the language would be descriptive language, which is just describing the way we think the world is, or the way we think a person is, or a situation, not necessarily really the way that they are. And then the other is there's declarative language, which is made up of declarations and promises and assertions and requests and agreements and commitments. And it actually brings a new future that wouldn't have existed otherwise. It brings that into existence. Like when I promise something, I'm promising something, not something that already happened, but something that you can count on to happen in the future. And so that's really the beginning of creation. Like if I make an agreement, it's an agreement for something that hasn't happened yet, that I'm agreeing to make happen. And so it's a future, it's the beginning of the creation using that language.
So that's fabulous. And this series of 6 Hangouts is a perfect example. So I'm traveling a number of weeks. I'm going up to Alberta next week, and then I'm going later in May to Toronto, also Canada again for other things. And you're traveling all over the place. And yet we made an agreement that we were going to do these Hangouts together. I made an agreement with my audience that I was going to provide 6 Hangouts about language. I called Ephraim, and he made an agreement with me to create something in the future that doesn't exist today, which is a set of 6 powerful interactions discussing the power of language and your ability to understand it and use it to create a future that you want to, and that you want to live into and have be your reality. And so we're doing that despite all of the other things. And somebody could die and change that agreement, I suppose. But short of something catastrophic like that, that agreement, like I started this Hangout this morning, and I didn't even think about whether or not Ephraim was going to be on the Hangout, because he said he was. And that is the way that I do business. It's the way that he does business. So he agreed to be on the Hangout. So he's going to be on the Hangout. And that kind of agreement, I didn't send him 3 notes ahead of time. I didn't call him an hour ago to see if he was still okay. And all that happens. I get it to me all the time. People call me and want to make sure this and that and the other. And they don't understand the nature of that sort of integrity, which is where I live and Ephraim lives. And I didn't even think about it. I started to hang out and Ephraim showed up. And that's what I knew was going to happen. Ephraim, you unmuted. Go for it.
Yeah, just the same thing I'd say to that with you is that it never even occurred to me, like, is Kellen going to be there for the Hangout? It never even, I knew the only way you wouldn't be here is if you were dead. And so I never even thought about it. I just knew you'd be here.
And so that's the beginning of creation. And creation twice, there's a spiritual sense. We plan. I mean, in business, you make a business plan, you make a strategic plan. In your life, you plan to get married or have a relationship or have a family. You look and you plan things in the future, and you think about how they're going to be, and you have that creation in your mind. And things don't always turn out like we first create them. Sometimes because we allow them to turn out different, and sometimes because we choose for them to turn out different because what we thought to start with doesn't work anymore. The issue is simply allowing that to happen as opposed to conscious choice about making those differences happen. And so when I say it all starts here, the first creation in language, the first creation in intent, precedes all meaningful and lasting and legacy creating creations that will come in the future. Ephraim, you have any more to say, add to that? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, it really does. It's just now I can't remember if there's the quote from Max Weber, and if I quoted it last week, I'm going to quote it again when he says that I'm under the impression that 9 out of 10 cases I deal with windbags who don't fully realize what they take upon them. And he goes on to say more, but if you think about it, it'd be a pretty extraordinary thing actually to find 1 in 10 people who really get the impact of their speaking. And so if he was hanging out, you know, he must have been hanging out with a pretty great group of people if his averages were that high. So I think it's a pretty rare thing. And that's really what for me, that's really what this 6 weeks is about, is giving people an access to what's it like to, language really is the core of creation, and what is giving people an access to how do you create and how do you use language powerfully rather than just making noise, you know?
Which is why we started with loose lips last week, which is the making noise part, because loose lips, we blubber. You know, I think I'm a trumpet player, right? And loose lips is like, you know, it doesn't do anything. You sort of splatter spittle all over the mirror or the wall or whoever you're talking to. You splatter your drivel all over them, and very quickly people are not to take you seriously for anything that you say. And it's a sad situation when you live in loose lips, but 9 out of 10 or 99 out of 100, depending on your crowd, live that way, and we sort of agree to just kind of let it be. And the extraordinary, when you see people do extraordinary things and you say, how do they do that? They're the 1 in 10, they're the 1 in 99 or 1 in 100 who understand what's going on and intentionally use it to create that which they have imagined. All right, so the next piece, number 2, is that words have power. And again, this is in the context of language being the core of creation. So words have power. And so people argue sometimes, talk is cheap. So that's the antithesis of words have power. Talk is cheap. Words have power. No, actually, words have power and talk is not cheap. Cheap talk is destructive. Cheap talk undermines relationships and creates deception and all kinds of other stuff. So talk is cheap. I understand why that is said. That means that people lie and they don't take seriously what they say, and everything that splatters out of their mouth on everyone around them is out of the loose lips piece. And that's where the talk is cheap comes from. But they have power because that set of circumstances creates the reality that nobody trusts and believes them, and everything that comes out of their mouth, like we say, every politician, is he lying? Is his lips moving? You know, those kinds of anecdotes come from that very thing. So there's my first little rant on words have power. Ephraim?
Yeah, the talk cheap. And it's just, I've heard that. And I think I'm going to assert that most of us have probably heard that. And it's considered that talk isn't cheap, but you cheapen your talk when you don't follow through on your word and when it's just making noise. And it's not that talk is cheap. It's just that we cheapen our talk when we don't have integrity behind what we're saying.
Perfect. Perfectly said and thought. And we have created the reality that our language means nothing. And the sad thing about that is that it takes away any power that you have to create in at least 3 ways. It takes away your internal power because you know you lie all the time. Okay, you know that your talk means nothing, and you simply come to grips with that fact. And once in a while you have a moment of clarity and you realize that you're full of crap, and that's all that you splatter, if that's your reality. The second way that it takes away your power is with those close to you, your immediate relationships. They know that you're not going to be somewhere when you say, that you're not really going to, pick up the bill for the meal, that you're not really going to do whatever it is. Your kids can know that. You're not really going to play with them. You just said later because you wanted to end the conversation. You're not going to handle the disagreement with your spouse because you just wanted to shut them up. And that becomes the reality, and it takes away all your power in those relationships that are close to you. Third, it completely takes away your power to create something of lasting value. So God, if his word was not full of integrity and power, when he said, let there be light, the elements would have ignored him because they knew that this dude blathers. Fortunately for us, that's not the case. And everything said, oh, God has spoken. That is integrity. We salute and we show up. And the notion that there is obedience and attraction to the principle of integrity is a radical but true and powerful principle. All right, now I'm going to stop here for a second and give Ephraim 1.7 seconds to catch his thoughts and then ask for some input.
The thing that keeps standing out to me is if you're going to create, you first have to create that you create. And the only way you do that is in language. And so it's really like you have to invent in language the domain of creating, the world of creating, and you only can do that in language.
So think about this. That brings to mind this way. I call something the state. I use the word the state of allowing. We fight with ourselves so often about whether or not we can do something. I can't, fill in the blank. I can't show up that way. I can't complete that thing. I can't make that much money. I can't learn that hard part. I give you an example. Last night and tonight, I'm in a group. We're performing. There are 1,000 people in the auditorium performing and about 1,500 to 2,000 watching. The creation of that spectacle, and it is world-class. It is a world-class group, and I mean that. I have evidence. We've recorded 4 albums in the last 2 years, and 2 of them have charted #1 on Billboard, so I don't have to prove any more than that. End of story. But that group is a result of the creation of the language and intent of 2 brothers who decided about 5 or 6 years ago that they were going to create that because they didn't see enough venue for uplifting and sacred and classical music. And so they invented that. It now has 5 chapters in Dallas, in Boise, in Utah, in Orange County, and here in Arizona. They perform at world-class levels. We're doing that last night. I'm watching world-class soloists who come and perform for free in that venue because they were inspired by the language and power of the creators who invented that in the language and then caused it to be by the sheer force of determination and the power of the language they articulated. And so I'm standing in the middle as witness to a piece of it because I'm in the group and in there, and I've been to rehearsal after rehearsal after rehearsal and memorized thousands of notes and everything else to do all this, along with everybody else, me and 1,000 other people. So that notion, the kids from 4 years through high school doing that kind of work, memorizing stuff to do that from the power of the language of these creators. So that's a long story, but it is an example I happen to be in the middle of right now, unfolding. The other 2 performances, which are sold out, are tonight. So that's an example of the words of creation that have power. And every time these guys talk at rehearsals and everything else, they use that language and they create visually and verbally and out loud and in an articulate and emotional and powerful way the vision of this language. So words have power. Ephraim?
Wow, what do you add to that?
I don't know. What did it make you think about?
Yeah, I just wanted to say amen.
Well, then amen, hallelujah. Anyway, the oratorio that we're performing is the other oratorio, the greatest probably oratorio, and you can argue this, it was ever written, was Handel's Messiah, and this is Mendelssohn's Elijah, and it is 2.5 hours long, and when it was premiered in 1846, it was hailed as one of the greatest achievements of human intelligence. It is one of the supreme masterworks of all time, musically, and some people have written over the 1.5 centuries or 2 centuries almost that it's been in existence, one of the supreme achievements of human intelligence. So, that kind of thing, it took Mendelssohn 10 years to do it and so forth, but the essence of that and being in part of that all comes from language. It comes from someone languaging first in their mind, then out loud, then passionately to others, so that they then come. And it makes me think of what I said about God creating, who spoke, let there be light. You know, I don't know what happened in between the words and the light. I don't care. He said, let there be light. And the next sentence is, and there was light. And God saw the light and it was good. Okay. The details in between the commas, I don't care. It showed up. So the point for you listening is, if you want access to that kind of power to create your version of those visions, begin by zipping the loose lips and by imagining the creative power that you get by intentionally focusing with your language and treating it as the core of your creation. Ephraim, any thoughts before we go on to part 3?
Yeah, just on one of my favorite things that stands out to me about that is that before God said, let there be light, what was there was darkness. And so there was, and let there be light, like it was a new future that didn't exist. What existed was dark, there was no light. And just that brought the possibility of there being light, and then there was light. So it brought a new future that didn't exist before that.
And one of the things that I find in coaching when I work with individuals is the paradigm shift that needs to take place, and the beauty when it takes place of moving from not being able to imagine a future to declaring and then seeing a future create and evolve. Mm-hmm. As you make those declarations. And so there was darkness before, there was light after. In your own situation and circumstance, there is circumstance A before that is in some way limiting, smaller, less powerful, less created, less fulsome, less benefit providing to yourself and others. And then you imagine and speak the language of a more powerful future as the core of the creation of that future. Part 3 is influencing yourself and others. So I'm going to let Ephraim start with this. Ephraim, how important is language in influencing yourself and others?
Well, there's been so much written on, and you could study for probably the rest of your life and study NLP and all kinds of things. And even in her book, Mindset, Carol Dweck talks about the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. How do you, rather than praising your kids or anybody, that you encourage them, and these different praising the effort rather than the outcome. And so she talks a little bit about ways to use language to influence people, influencing ourselves. And the thing that stands out to me is that for the people watching, if you're going around through your day and you're trying to remember to say the right thing all the time, it's not about that. It's really an awareness of what I am speaking. And the other thing is that I'm not telling you that anything I'm saying is true even. And I'm not saying, I'm making an assertion about language, and Kellen, together on these calls, we're making an assertion about language and saying it's the core of creation. And I don't think either of us are saying this is the truth and this is right and this is the way you should do it. But rather try it on for yourself. And that's what I love about transformation, is that it's you can try it on. This shirt, before I bought this shirt, at one time I didn't own this shirt. It wasn't mine. And I tried it on and I liked it. And then I kept it. And that's what transformation's like. So I do want to say that it's not it's not the right way, and it's not the way you should live your life or anything like that. It's just a possibility, and try it on. And just see what it maybe you like the way it fits. Maybe you like the reason in your life. And then I'll say, it's a context for your life. It's the way that everything shows up in your life. Is I'm at the source of that. I'm creating that, and I created it in language and with integrity and behind my word. And so that's the context. And then it's very effortless to live your life that way. You don't have to go through your life trying to remember to say the right things. And remember to use language in the right way. It's just, it becomes the context that you speak powerfully and you live your life powerfully.
So that's fantastic, and thank you for describing it like that. I love the try it on analogy. I use that also a lot talking to folks about don't decide. And the part about, I am going to be the last person to tell you what to do, and so is Ephraim. what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to assert some things because of what I have learned and experienced. I'm going to give ideas or assertions, and how you listen to those, or listen those, I will say it that way, how you listen those ideas. And I've done that at my events too. I like the dropping the preposition. But anyway, how you assimilate those ideas and what you choose to do them. And I love the notion of not running around with lists of things. Well, I have to say it this way, I have to say it that way. No, you don't. Because the way you would say it in the way that's most powerful for you, I can't give you. And Ephraim can't give you. We cannot give you the way that would be powerful for you. What we're suggesting you try on is the notion that you pay attention to the language you use and see how it contributes power or vision or creation to your day, life, and future. And try it on in different ways. And if it fits, and you notice that distinction and that system provides power for you, and that you can assimilate that and use that power, then it fits, and keep the jacket or the shirt. One thing that I want to add, or not add, but think about with that shirt or jacket analogy is this. If I go to a store and try something on, and it fits, I can keep it. But I can only keep it if I pay for it. So I have to go to the person who made it, and I have to give them something for it. So if you try something on, whether it's what we're describing in these 6 weeks of language, or the integrity one, or one we'll do after that, and it fits, the pay for, I'm not suggesting send me a check or Ephraim. What I am saying is there is a process of transformation, a price, if you will, for change. Because every time we make a change, it requires some paradigm shift, some energetic expenditure to do something different. And so when you try something on, it isn't magic. The trying of it on requires adjustment. You might put a suit on and it works well, and you get a little tailoring made on the sleeves and whatever, and then it's exactly perfect. So the effort required to make it work for you is the effort required to make it work for you, not the effort required to make it work for me, or the way I described it. It's the effort required to make it work for you, to serve you and be the most powerful and fluid in your life. We're not quite out of time. I misread the clocks. We have a couple minutes left. Ephraim, comments?
Even if we could, well, first of all, I want to say we're not saying don't send us money either.
No, of course not.
What I really want to say though is we could tell you all the right things to say, and it'll be of no use to you, because you have to create that power for yourself. And that's what that's what I hear when I hear you talking about that, Kellen. Like, we could tell you all the right things to say, and you'll have no power in saying it, because you have to create the power for yourself. It's not in what you're saying, it's in who you're being that's saying it. That's where the real power is.
So that is so congruent with things that you teach in your coaching, or help people come to realize. I wouldn't even say the word teach, because modeling or explaining something, again, creates no power. It gives somebody a suit to try on or a shirt to try on. And then after the trying on, you need to decide how it will fit for you. And that internal power comes from two places. It comes from your own, it being in integrity, or you creating yourself in integrity with that. And it comes from a certainty that this jacket fits with who I am and what I'm about. So one of the favorite topics that I have when I get to speak is at two questions. Who are you and what do you stand for? And the reason is because if you answer those questions truthfully and right down to the core, you can create power around that. And the power you can create is to create a future that's in alignment with that and that you want. If you can't answer those questions, or if you answer them without integrity, you won't have any power to create anything, because you don't know who you are. So it's grounded in sand, it's grounded in air, it's grounded in nothing. If it's grounded with the core of who you are, the essence of your spiritual or intelligent energy, then you're grounded to an infinite source of power from which you can create, from which you can language a future that has efficacy, that has power, that carries vibrancy and the ability to move forward with creation. Until it is grounded there, it simply remains an interesting suit on a rack in a store that somebody else said was nice fitting and did cool stuff for them when they wore it. Ephraim, any final comments before we close up here?
Yeah, you got it. It's created. Its power's created.
I want to thank Ephraim for showing up today, and I thank him in advance for showing up for the next 4 weeks. There is 1 week we're skipping, and I can't remember what it is, but if you follow it on G+, you'll see. So there are 4 more episodes of the language series that we're going to do. If you want to get a hold of me, breakthecagenow.com, breakthecagenow.com. The URL's on the screen. Please do. And if you want to get a hold of Ephraim through me, I'd be happy to put you in touch with him as well. If Ephraim, you want to say anything about somebody to get a hold of you really quick? It's not, you don't have a lower third or anything.
Yeah. If somebody wanted to get a hold of me, then get with Kellen. I don't advertise or anything. I have a website or anything. So yeah. That's
okay,
great.
Cool. All right. Breakthecagenow.com. The purpose of these Hangouts is to give you suits to try on, to give you jackets that might fit, and to give you some suggestions that you, through your own internal examination and power, might decide you can anchor to the core of who you are and what you stand for, and create powerful results going forward with those. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next week as we move ahead again into Break the Cage Now with the third part on our series on language.